Crowds have gathered at town halls across France to stand in solidarity with local governments targeted in 6 nights of relentless riots that were triggered by the fatal police shooting of a 17-year-old. The unrest has been driven by a teenage backlash in the suburbs and urban housing projects against a French state that many young people with immigrant roots say routinely discriminates against them. 99 town halls targeted in the violence seen across France, along with other public buildings. Authorities say the average age of those arrested is 17, the same age as the boy killed by police who sparked these riots. 17-year-old Nael was killed by police during a traffic stop in a Paris suburb on June 27th. Since he was shot, rioters have torched cars and looted stores. Nael's death has fed long-standing complaints of police violence and systemic racism from rights groups and within low-income, racially mixed suburbs that surround major French cities.
Je leur ai dit arrêtez, arrêtez. Ils ont fait ça le prétexte de Naël.
The boy's grandmother saying, "I blame the police officer who killed my grandson. That's all I'm angry with. We have the police, and lucky for us that we have the police. And the people who are breaking things, I tell them, stop it, stop it. They're doing this with Nael as a pretext. No, people should stop." The home of a mayor of a town in France targeted in the attacks. Citizens and officials gathered today in the French town of Les Haies-les-Roses after the mayor's family home was attacked on Saturday night. The mayor, Vincent Jeanbrun, led the march along with other right-wing mayors and officials. He later gave a speech denouncing what he called an attack on democracy. Jeanbrun's home was ram-raided and set on fire while his wife and children were asleep inside, he said. His wife and one of their 2 children, aged 5 and 7, were injured as they fled the building in the early hours. Approximately 160 people were arrested overnight, the French Interior Ministry said today. The relative calm following 5 nights of heavy riots offered some relief to the government of Emmanuel Macron in its fight to regain control of the situation, just months after widespread protests over an unpopular pension reform and a year out from hosting the Olympics. The Interior Ministry has sent about 45,000 police officers onto the streets each night to quell the unrest, which has mostly been confined to the suburbs, but occasionally erupted into clashes in tourist areas. The shooting of the 17-year-old with Algerian and Moroccan parents has tapped a deep vein of anti-police resentment, specifically among Muslim communities of North African descent, in particular, have long accused police of racial profiling and violent tactics. Joining us now to talk about this unrest in France is Arthur Goldhammer from the Center for European Studies at Harvard University. Professor, do you think the death of this teenager has triggered a revolt against a sense of racism in France that many have been feeling for a long time?
It has done that, although it's also triggered a backlash. For example, a fund has been started to support the family of the policeman who's accused of killing this young man. And that fund has raised 5 times as much money as the fund to support the family of the victim. So there's been a very strong backlash against the support for the young man who died in this incident. This goes back to the beginning of immigration in France. There were previous riots in 2005 that were not quite as extensive as this, but did consume the country for a longer period of time. The current riots seem to be dying down as we speak. The number of arrests has been decreasing for the past couple of nights. In 2005, the riots went on for almost 3 weeks, and a state of emergency was declared, which was not the case this time. On the other hand, you can make an argument that things have gotten worse in France, particularly since the 2015 terrorist attacks against the Bataclan nightclub in which 120 people died, and the murder of Samuel Paty, a teacher who showed his class cartoons criticizing the Prophet Muhammad, which led to his beheading by a Muslim terrorist. So those two events have marked French consciousness and I think have contributed to the backlash that I mentioned before.
What can be done to quell this violence before it gets even worse?
Well, so far the reaction of the government has been mainly a security reaction. What it's ignored entirely is its failure in the past to act on improving conditions in the suburbs of the large cities where most of the violence has been concentrated. After the 2005 riots, there was an attempt to initiate a program of reforms to provide new housing, better schooling in the suburbs, which are generally underserved with public goods of all kinds. And that did not happen.
Lately, there have been many violent riots in France. Even before this teenager was shot by police, thousands took to the streets against President Emmanuel Macron's retirement reforms. How does this look on the president?
Well, there are many people who blame the president for either laxity in the face of rioters or provocations that have driven people into the streets. It was certainly the case in the case of the demonstrations against retirement reforms and the previous Yellow Vests uprising that Macron was the principal target. In this case, however, it's not so much Macron as the police and his interior minister, who has been entirely supportive of the police and of their aggressive tactics. By contrast, Macron, in this instance, as well as his prime minister, Elizabeth Borne, took the position that the police had acted imprudently in this traffic stop and should not have shot this young man. So Macron is trying to take a middle position in these events.
Thank you so much for joining us, Professor.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.